So we've got a two-part session. My name is Cedric Porter. I'm the editor of Brexit, Food and Farming, which is a monthly journal looking at the effects of Brexit on the food and farming industries. I also edit Markets, a weekly market briefing. And we have some great speakers here today. And as I say, we've got a two-part session. We're going to be running for about an hour and a half, about 3/4 of an hour for each session. The first session is going to be on how the agreement and how Brexit is sort of shaping up, and really in the last 8 weeks since we've had the start of the agreement and proper Brexit, if you like, or real Brexit. And then we're going to be moving on to UK and an EU agricultural policy after that. Please use your Q&A functions to fire in some questions to us. If you could keep your chat you can chat amongst yourselves on the chats function, but if you could please ask any questions on the Q&A function rather than on the chat function, because they might get a bit lost on that chat function there. Right, so let's look at introducing our speakers. And for the first part, we have part one, real Brexit, 8 weeks on. And we've got three speakers from different parts of Europe speaking on that, just really from their sort of perspective, how things are going, where there have been successes, where perhaps there's a need for improvements. And we have Nick Westenholz, who's the Director of Trade and Business Strategy at the UK National Farmers Union. We have Tim Heddemer from he's the Agricultural Counsellor at the Dutch Embassy in the UK, based in London, and Patrick Brennan, who's the Meat, Food and Beverages Director at Board Beer, the body that promotes Irish food in Ireland, across Europe and beyond. So yeah, let's start just really putting in a little bit of context about where we are in terms of the agreement and how we are. So I'm just moving you speakers away from my screen. And so where we are in terms of the agreement, what was agreed on Christmas Eve, just a week before the agreement actually came into force. So very, very much a sort of a late agreement. And that had, there were no preferential tariffs on trade of goods between the UK and the EU, but that trade is subject to customs and plants and animal health checks along the way. So it's not a single market, it's not customs, it's customs free, but it's not a single market in terms of no checks and balances there. The UK has been phasing in of checks, and there are more checks to come in April, particularly for food and animal products, and also, goods that have been shipped to the EU from the UK have been subject to checks since January the 1st. There are rules of origin system, so that imports of goods coming in from outside the EU and then perhaps going from the UK to the EU, there are rules of origin checks and rules there. We won't go into those sort of details because we'd be here forever. There's also a special arrangement for trade between Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland and the EU, between England, Scotland and Wales. So to avoid checks on the Northern Ireland border, I'm sure that will come up. Just to put it in context, the value of EU exports to the UK was around about 34 billion just in the first 10 months of 2020. So that makes the UK by itself by far the largest market to the EU, twice that of the US, and around about, or just more than a fifth of the total of exports go to the EU. Food and drink exports go to the UK. Other way around, UK imports into the EU are around about 12.5 billion. So the largest supplier ahead of Brazil. So our speakers are just going to give a few minutes, only less than 5 minutes, just a quick sort of briefing on how they see the agreement going, and then we'll open up for Q&A. So please start putting in your Q&As, and if we could speak to, if Nick could speak first, that'd be great. So over to you, Nick. Many thanks.
Thank you, Cedric. Afternoon, everybody. So the way I've sort of framed it, what the UK farming sector's overriding response on Christmas Eve, well, probably none of them are paying attention because it was Christmas Eve, but those who were paying attention when the deal came through, I think it was one of relief. As we all know, the UK, or the farming sectors indeed on both sides of the Channel and on the island of Ireland, would have been impacted by no deal probably more than any other sectors, primarily because of the issue of tariffs, of course, and the spectre of tariffs having been applied overnight on trade both ways under WTO rules. And that would have had an enormous impact on agriculture sectors in the EU 27 and in the UK. So of course that was avoided, which is why relief, I think, was the key emotion from the news that a deal had been struck. Other than that, though, I don't think there's an awful lot to distinguish the deal we've got and so many of the aspects of no deal. There are clearly aspects of this deal which which form the basis of a hopefully constructive relationship between the EU and the UK. But fundamentally, the UK has left the EU and the customs union, as Cedric just said. And we are seeing the impacts of that quite markedly already. The pandemic and the response to that has dominated the news over the first couple of months of this year, which is not surprising. And I think to some degree that has meant that we haven't noticed as much as we otherwise might some of the issues arising from Brexit. So there are certainly some serious concerns, particularly I think for smaller companies, from the extra frictions and the extra costs that now very clearly apply on UK to EU trade. And I say UK to EU trade because most of these have arisen due to checks at the border and the certification, the documentary requirements, particularly under SPS, under the SPS regime. And of course, those are not really being applied, apart from in some specific areas, on EU to UK trade. And I won't talk about the specific Northern Ireland Protocol because that's obviously a whole bit of mayhem on its own. But I'm sure we'll cover that in some depth later this afternoon. So the controls on imports are coming into play from April and then in full from July, as we understand it. That's the current situation. There are rumours that is being looked at. So we wait to hear any news on that. But there are a couple of other moments this year when I think extra and additional frictions and costs are going to arise and will exacerbate some of the problems we're seeing at the moment. These are the sort of acute short-term problems, which even though they're acute and short-term, they are structural, they will exist. But I think many businesses will, and we're already seeing it, to be honest, are beginning to familiarise themselves with the new requirements, the new paperwork, etc. Bigger businesses, I think, are able to absorb many of those costs. Our concerns really are for many of the smaller businesses who these extra costs and extra frictions may just become too much to bear. They may erode those margins they already have to an extent where it's not viable for them to trade into the EU. Either that means that maybe they're not viable at all anymore, or perhaps that they reposition themselves to just serve the domestic market here. So these are the kind of issues we're facing now. Maybe there's a sort of I was going to say the more interesting, I don't know, but an interesting aspect is actually some of the other aspects of the TCA, which we can come on to talk about, which will have an impact on the longer term way that the industry operates, particularly, I think, the level playing field aspects of the deal and the fact that the UK government fought so hard to secure, in inverted commas, sovereignty. But clearly within the deal, there is room for the UK government to diverge on regulations to quite a degree if it so wishes. But if it does so wish, that will have some implications in terms of potential retaliation, in terms of tariffs perhaps from the EU, but also question marks on broader ability to trade with other countries. It may even facilitate it, for example. So there's a big question mark at the moment over what the government in the UK is going to do with its newfound sovereignty, and not many answers. But my feeling is that agriculture and food may well be the areas where these questions first come into play and are most acute, because it's probably in agriculture and food where the temptation or the motivation to diverge is going to be felt most keenly. So one to watch over the longer term while we deal with the immediate challenges of the new frictions that have arisen. Cedric, that's all I was going to say.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks very much, Nick. That's a good putting it in context from the British point of view. So let's move to Tim Hedema, who's at the Dutch Embassy, to give a sort of perspective on the relationship over the last few weeks and how that might develop.
Hi, everyone. Yes, thanks, Cedric. Thank you very much for inviting me today. I'll try to paint a picture indeed of what happened on the ground in the Netherlands. But to start with, I arrived in the UK in March 2017. That was right on time for the start of the Brexit negotiations. Now, 4 years later, the end of my term is unfortunately in sight, with about 5 months to go. And this may or may not coincide with the implementation of the final phase of the UK's border operating model. I think Nick alluded to it already a bit. Now, as Dutch agricultural councillors do, I serve the interests of Dutch agri and food through trade promotion, policy, research, cooperation. Brexit, of course, touches on all of this, and dealing with preparations and consequences of Brexit has been my number one task on a daily basis. Always clear there was much to lose from Brexit, as the UK and the Netherlands are inextricably linked by trade. You can see behind me how close we are geographically, and the UK is still the third biggest destination for Dutch agricultural exports. It's quite stable at 8.4 to 8.7 billion euros in the past few years. And some have estimated that 15% of the UK's food imports come from the Netherlands. And we have high hitters in fruit and vegetables, flowers and plants, meat and dairy products, all across the board, really. For Brexit, our motto has always been hope for the best, prepare for the worst. And our preparations for the 1st of January have been intensive, as it was always going to be the case that a lot would change regardless of there being a trade deal or not. The bottom line, of course, is that the UK and the EU would become, and now are, third countries in terms of trade. And in fact, our preparations continue even now, as the UK is phasing in requirements over a period of half a year. And the embassy has a major role to play in helping Dutch government and businesses. And the information campaign in the Netherlands itself has also been long and very much in depth. I want to name a few examples. Among other things, Dutch companies can do an online Brexit impact scan. The Ministry of Agriculture organizes monthly stakeholder meetings. And we also constantly liaise, of course, with the UK government, that is DEFRA, the Border and Protocol Delivery Group, for troubleshooting and solving outstanding questions on the new rules and procedures. And I should also mention the ministry's so-called serious games, in which companies do a simulation of the new trade processes, in some cases also with the help of our friends at DEFRA. Now, about the trade and cooperation agreement and the Dutch experience with the first few weeks of that new relationship. The outcome of the negotiations, although perhaps not the best, and for that I only need to point to fisheries, has at least brought us the zero tariff deal that both sides wanted, or rather I should say preferential tariff, as many traders are now having to deal with rules of origin. They need to either prove that their product is in fact eligible for this preferential tariff of 0, or they have to simply accept that in some cases paying tariffs is unavoidable. Just think of flowers and fresh produce traders sourcing from African or Latin American countries. Around the 1st of January, we received many questions about this at the embassy and also back home at the ministry. So rules of origin, a real headbreaker for some. In total, though, numbers of questions from Dutch exporters remain relatively low. What's at play here probably is a combination of trade volumes still being lower than normal, the new UK requirements only being phased in on the 1st of April for most products, and the overall level of preparation with the help of Dutch trade organizations. So I would say our overall level of preparation is quite good. Questions that we did get in January were mostly related to the export to Great Britain of ornamental trees and plants, which is quite logical because they are covered by the first phase of the border operating model. Already now they need to be pre-notified, be accompanied by a phytosanitary certificate. And these questions were mainly about the concept of a place of destination, where inspections can take place away from the border and where UK plant passports can be attached. But in fact, so far, most of our difficulties have arisen on the import side. So goods coming in from Great Britain, and specifically products of animal origin coming in through our border control post in the port of Rotterdam. It will be no news to you all that there have been problems, seeing that the papers have reported fish and pigs' heads rotting in Rotterdam. Probably a bit harsh, but the reality is that in these first 2 months of the year, unfortunately, many of those consignments of veterinary products arrived with incorrect or sometimes even missing veterinary health certificates. These would be incomplete, be the wrong model, not stamped in the right manner. These would contain incorrect inspection locations, notification numbers, amounts, weight, contradicting data, to just give a few examples. And in the first week, such errors were in almost every consignment from Great Britain. And now the percentage is still at 60 to 70%. And this all created a huge backlog for our inspection centers and the Food Safety Authority, which already early on took the decision to prioritize all consignments coming from Great Britain, trying to avoid congestion. They're now able to work through the backlog of the previous week in weekends, but in the course of each week, of course, delays add up and are sometimes more than a day. And this is just on our side, because our feedback will inevitably lead to necessary changes on the exporter side and even further delays. Because of all this, and in addition to the European Commission liaising with DEFRA on interpretation questions, we are constantly in close contact with DEFRA to discuss operational issues of a recurring nature. And I want to stress that we are very happy with that cooperation right now. DEFRA has really ramped up its engagement on post-Brexit trade relations from around December last year, even if it's become a bit harder, to be honest, to keep track of the relevant guidance, which is now spread all over the internet in places like the Plant Health Portal, and not just on the government's EU exit pages. Nevertheless, we've been able to get further clarifications on a range of topics like CITES permits, requirements for regulated plants, soil and growing media. And we're very happy as well with DEFRA's series of webinars on EU-UK trade. That's of great help to businesses too. Now we're in the run-up to phase 2 of the UK's border operating model, with pre-notification and health certificate requirements being introduced on the 1st of April for all other plant and animal products exported to Great Britain. Naturally, we have concerns, especially when it comes to fresh produce, being of a perishable nature and considering the scale of our exports in those. For cut flowers and plants, this entails probably, that's our estimate, issuing 250,000 phytosanitary certificates per year. And for fruit and vegetables, more than 300,000 consignments per year would require 1 or more certificates. That's quite huge. And this will require a great effort from our inspection services. And in addition, I should also say, UK importers have expressed some concern about the UK's IT system, speech and IPAVs. According to them, the former is not up to task, and it is unclear when the latter will be finally phased in. So, all in all, things have definitely not settled into a new normal yet. Businesses will have to get used to the EU and UK being third countries in respect of each other, They will have to accept that things cannot always go the exact same way as before. And as governments, the onus is on us to find ways to smoothen trade flows within the new rules with the help, for instance, of electronic solutions, we hope, in the future. The good news, to finalize, is that for now, the Dutch are definitely not pulling out of the trading with the UK. It will cost time, this new reality. It will cost money in some cases. But our agri and food trade relations are too strong to be changed fundamentally, I think. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks for that roundup, Tim. And thanks for the good image behind showing how close, well, Netherlands and the rest of Europe are to the UK. Let's move on to Patrick, just to give us a brief outline of how he sees it from the Irish perspective, the relationship over the last few.
Great. Thanks, Cedric. Hope you can still hear me. My network is acting up a little bit.
Yep.
But, first of all, thanks very much for the invitation to participate today. I really appreciate it, and hopefully it'll be an interesting discussion. I just thought maybe first of all to introduce Board B a little bit, because not everybody might be familiar with the organisation. Essentially, we're a semi-state agency here in Ireland that's responsible for the promotion, trade development and marketing of Irish food and drink products right around the world. So we're headquartered in Dublin, have a network of 15 international offices spread across Europe, North America, Asia, Middle East and Africa. When you look at it then in terms of the Irish food sector as a backdrop to what we're talking about this afternoon, we have a very highly export-orientated sector. So if you look at our meat sector or our dairy sector, we would typically export about 90% of everything that we produce. So in total then across food and drink last year in 2020, the value of our food and drink exports would have been about 13 billion euro. And I suppose put into context the discussion we're having this afternoon around Brexit, the UK remains the single biggest export market that Ireland has when it comes to food and drink products. Last year, the value of trade to the UK was worth in the region of about 4.3 billion euro, or about a third of the total. So it's absolutely has been, and we will hope will remain a critical market for us. I think in terms of what we've seen over the last 8 weeks or so, I think I'd use the word that Nick used at the very outset when we saw around the trade cooperation agreement being reached. There was a sense of relief, particularly given the outcome in relation to tariffs. And I think that was the general sense around the industry at that time. But there was also the sense and the reality and I suppose the knowledge, knowing that no tariffs didn't mean any extra cost or complexity. We were going to be dealing with a different trading environment come the 1st of January that was going to introduce complexity and costs that hadn't been there previously. So there was an understanding that those days of that seamless trade, if you like, were gone. And I suppose since the 1st of January, the real focus within the industry here has been about keeping product moving obviously to the British market, but also the fact that we've traditionally relied on the UK land bridge to get product to continental Europe, equally to keep that product moving as smoothly as we can. So what we've seen is transport and logistic costs in particular have all increased. Traditionally, as I said, we would have relied quite a bit on that UK land bridge, but since January the 1st, exporters have been hesitant, if you like, to use that option for fear of delays and if you like, slowness in getting product to the final market. And that's very evident when you look at the freight figures and the freight traffic figures that we've seen since the start of this year. If you look at the last month alone, for example, the freight traffic to the UK from Ireland is down by about 50% on what it would have been the same time last year. Whereas if you like, freight directly to Europe is up by well over 100%. So you are seeing that shift, and I suppose that's also recognising the fact that we had a lot of new direct ferry services introduced from Ireland to the continent of Europe as well. So I think the thing about that is shipping directly to continental Europe is more expensive for us to go through the UK land bridge. Depending on the sector that you're involved with, that can increase your transport and if you like, shipping costs by anything between 20 and 40%. So that's a significant change when you think about a relatively tight margin business in the first place. The second issue we have is it's slower. It takes longer to get to market, and particularly when you're thinking about some of the more perishable products, that can be a challenge. So it's great to have those direct services, but it's not quite as efficient or as quite as quick, and it's certainly more expensive than what we would have been dealing with before that. In terms of exporting to the GB market then itself, obviously the level of new procedures and documentation to be completed, if you like, has increased considerably, which has seen our companies having to invest in more systems and personnel to make sure everything is in place as it should be, if you like, to ensure as little delay as we can. Again, this is adding cost to the system. The other thing for us is what we're finding is as trucks are, if you like, delivering product to the British market, they're struggling to have that truck full on return. And again, because that truck might be coming back half empty, that again is having an impact in terms of the cost of the overall, if you like, transport of the product in the first place. In advance of the new trading relationship coming into place, there was also a considerable build-up of stocks in the British market as supposed to help ease any of the initial teething problems that we all suspected will be in case. And I suppose that has helped to reduce the scale of the issues that we've seen over the last 8 weeks. But it's also fair to say we've probably yet to see a week's trade that would represent 100% of normal. So we're still very much in that transitionary phase where volumes of trade, if you like, are slowly increasing as the week goes by. So it's keeping, I suppose, it manageable at the moment. For us, I suppose the focus has been trying to get through the last 8 weeks as best we possibly can, and our companies I think have done well in that regard, but also working to the realization that's only phase one of what we have to get right. Obviously, the next phase, if you like, comes into force on the 1st of April, as has been mentioned in terms of the requirements around health certificates, SPS checks in terms of agri-food products being imported into GB. And again, they have the potential to cause delays and add cost. And I suppose what we're working on is on the two sides of that equation is on the Irish side, just making sure we have the ability to deliver and have those health certificates in place when we need them. And obviously then hoping that the inspection systems that run in the UK are as smoothly run as possible and efficiently run as possible. So if I was to summarise, Cedric, I suppose we've probably worked through, the industry has really worked through the initial implementation of the TCA as well as possible. But again, that's reflected back no more to what Tim was saying, 4 years of preparation. We knew that things were going to change. So there's been a lot of investment in supply chain modelling, getting the understanding around customs procedures and what would be involved, what had to be in place at different points in the supply chain. So that's really, I suppose, stood the sector in good position so far. And I think that will hopefully continue as we go through the month. The issue for us, I suppose, as we go through and extra costs are being added to the system, it does put pressure on the viability of that trade, particularly from some of the medium to smaller enterprises, as was highlighted earlier on. And I suppose the other thing is there's still uncertainty about post-April, post-July, exactly what we're going to be dealing with. And I suppose where there's uncertainty, there can be a little bit of concern as well. So from our point of view in Board B, and I know from an industry point of view, the key element for us at the moment is keeping that product flowing, but also maintaining the relationships that we have with our customers in the British market. Many of those relationships go back decades. And I'm glad to say that to date, there has been little, if any, disruption of supply into the British market, which is a positive development. From a Board B point of view, we're really trying to stay as close as we can to our key customers in the British market. And we have a series of kind of high-level meetings planned over the coming weeks. I suppose to reconfirm our commitment to the market, number one, and that commitment to show, I suppose, that we can continue to have a positive trading relationship as we've had for many, many decades, particularly when you look at the lack of self-sufficiency in the British market, particularly when it comes to beef or some of the dairy products. So that will be our ambition, I suppose. So far, the initial implementation has gone well, but there's a lot of detail yet to come, Cedric.
That's great. Thanks very much for that update. We've got some questions coming in, so we'll go straight through to those questions. And I think the first one, question for Patrick: do you think the Northern Ireland Protocol should be scrapped? And if so, what should replace it to ensure freer trade with the UK and Ireland?
Well, I think an awful lot of work went into developing the Northern Ireland Protocol, and it goes right back to the Good Friday Agreement that's in place. So I think that has been an agreement that has been reached after many, many years of difficult negotiations. So I think the protocol represents a good compromise in terms of the negotiations that took place between the European Union and the UK government. For us, we think it makes sense in that it protects the Good Friday Agreement, which is absolutely vital for us on the island of Ireland. So I think, yes, there's been issues around the protocol. I know it's good to see kind of joint commitments from the EU and UK governments even over the last week in terms of reaffirming the commitment to the protocol, but also a commitment to work through some of the issues that have arisen and hopefully find a way through those. And I think that's what you'd be hoping to see, where there are issues that have been identified. Are there solutions that can be found for them? Is there some sort of equivalence that can be found to address some of them and hopefully iron out some of the barriers that have arisen over the last 8 weeks?
So yeah, so keep on talking, but essentially keep it. Next question we have: what are the prospects for a Swiss-style or New Zealand-style veterinary and SPS agreement being negotiated between the UK and EU to replace the SPS chapter of the TCA? And sorry, it's just disappeared off my screen, so I need to grab that again. It is clear that from the animal feed trade perspective, the SPS chapter is not sufficient to achieve the aims in the TCA around the not imposing unnecessary impediments to trade. And that's from James McCulloch. So I don't know who wants to pick up the idea of SPS. Nick, do you want to speak about SPS there? Just you know, is that working? Is there a need to perhaps have a different sort of style, and the New Zealand style where there's less checks?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think yes. Clearly the SPS provisions in the TCA are pretty thin, and they are what is at the heart of a lot of the frictions that we're seeing. And yeah, I mean, we would like to see them improved and streamlined quite significantly in a perfect world. And you know, you look at the New Zealand veterinary agreements, for instance, and realise that New Zealanders have a much more streamlined, smoother, freer process than we now do as the UK. But the reality is this is what is being negotiated with the TCA, and I think we have to be realistic about the prospects of it being opened up and aspects of it being renegotiated. I don't think that is going to happen. I think what we've seen in the last couple of months is pretty clear that's not going to happen. Instead, are there going to be ways of fine-tuning it and just improving the operation of the provisions within it? Yes, we'd hope so, and there's clearly an intention and language that holds out the prospect of cooperation and streamlining the SPS provisions. But one of the issues there is that language within the TCA, I think it's in one of the annexes, relates very clearly to the working groups that are setting up, I can't remember what they're called now, the committees, working committees set up as part of the architecture. So there's a specific SPS committee, and that doesn't exist yet. And I'm not sure it's possible for that to exist until the European Parliament has ratified the TCA, which we've now recently heard is being delayed again until April. So it seems to me that there's a fairly long slog on this, and we probably are unlikely to see improvements or market improvements anytime too soon. So I think, just being realistic, we absolutely want to see improvements. Maybe one day moving to New Zealand or Swiss type veterinary agreements is possible. But actually, we need to see the architecture under the agreement set up to start facilitating that first, and we haven't even got there yet.
Thanks very much, Nick, and apologies for my telephone during that. Tim, do you want to follow up on SPS as well? We've also got a question from Catherine Pace talking about SPS, which is really my understanding from mid-size exporting cheesemakers in the UK, is that they feel at some cost to themselves they've got to grips with the SPS documentation, but the matching documentation required from their customers at ports of arrival, such as Rotterdam, is frequently lacking, so product cannot be released from customs. Is that the issue, that there's you know, it gets to an EU port and then can't be released because of SPS customs issues there?
Yeah, I think the question here is then also are there errors on the import side as well, not just on the exporter side? Could be. It's difficult to judge individual cases, of course. What I have explained is that still around 60 to 70% of the documentation coming in from the exporter is incorrect. Probably there will be cases where the matching documentation from the importer is also incorrect, or is incorrect while the exporter's information is correct. That can be the case, but the major issue that we're experiencing is, I think, UK exporters still getting to grips with what's needed on the exporting side.
Thanks very much, Shadu. We got Abby Kay's question in. She's been waiting for a while for the question. So just quickly for you again, Tim, do you think Dutch food exporters will face the same issues as UK exporters to the Netherlands when the UK introduces checks later this year, sort of coming up in April and July?
Yeah, possibly. It depends. I mentioned IT systems. IT systems will have to be up to scratch. The sheer volume may cause problems. I think what is needed is that we get clear requirements in terms of the documentation. How does the UK want health certificates to look? What should be in them? That's very important, so we can issue the right certificates. Yeah, like I said, sheer volume might be a problem. IT systems is what we hear from UK importers is a real concern. So because of that, there may be similar problems, but we're doing everything we can to prepare, and we're doing that together with DEFRA.
Thanks for that. We got a question here from Stefan Nimmerol. In Austria, we fear that Irish beef might flood continental markets and lower the prices for local farmers. Do you see any switch from UK customers to EU customers yet? Patrick, that's probably one for you.
Yeah, thanks, Cedric. Certainly, we're not in the business of trying to flood any market if we can avoid it. Is the first thing to say. Obviously, the UK market has obviously been a critical market for Irish beef for many decades. Even last year, nearly 47% of our beef exports were destined for the UK market. Certainly, so far this year, we haven't seen any significant fall off in the volume of Irish beef going into the UK market. In terms of our overall output this year is actually a little bit lower. So we'd expect our total export volumes in 2021 to be lower in the first place. And if we can continue, and depending on what happens when we get to the next round in terms of SPS checks and everything, as long as trade continues on a kind of an unbroken sort of fashion, I wouldn't see any need for us to be moving product away from the UK market. Obviously, what we always try and do is find the best market we can for our product, and our focus as an industry is very much to try and get the best return rather than trying to offload product at a lower price. So I wouldn't have any concerns on that front from an Austrian market perspective.
Thanks, Patrick. Let's have Jacqueline of Weibinger. My apologies for my pronunciation there, Jacqueline. Questions for Tim. Some Dutch companies that import products from the UK experience problem with Dutch agencies such as NWVWA. I will let you explain who that is since January the 1st, even though the particular product has been imported for many years before. So how is the NVWA solving these administrative issues? And she knows of a company who have truckloads of products missing in transport somewhere between where they originated in Scotland and where they're meant to arrive in the Netherlands.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, missing in transport sounds very mysterious. I hope they found them by now. Yeah. In any case, yeah. Again, it's of course very difficult to comment on individual cases. We can't be sure if this company is providing the right information. I think in general we have to accept that especially SMEs are finding it quite difficult to export for the first time if they haven't done that before. If they've been in the EU and only have traded within the EU, this is all very much new to them. Yeah, in terms of what the NVWA is doing, and the NVWA is our food safety authority. Like I said. Yeah, we're prioritizing UK consignments, so they have priority over all other consignments. It's very difficult to prioritize within that priority, if you get my drift, because the backlog is quite big. They are working in weekends extra to get through that backlog. We are providing feedback to those individual companies so they don't make the same mistakes again, if there are any mistakes, of course. And we also provide that feedback through the embassy to DEFRA, because of course we don't want all those issues to keep recurring. So that in general is what the NVWA is doing. But indeed, there are there are a lot of administrative issues, and those are exactly the ones that I described earlier on.
Thanks, Tim. This is probably again for you, Rotterdam being the world's largest port. A lot of third countries, this is from Jamie Day, a lot of third country feed materials, including examples like South American soya meal, are shipped into Rotterdam for breaking down to smaller vessels to reach the UK. Has this movement been affected? I suppose it's sort of rules of origins type question.
Yeah, I haven't heard about developments for this specific product category, to be honest. So not much might be happening. I don't know, but it could be. If this is imported and then re-exported, you might be hit by tariffs twice. So it might be very much affected. But I don't have any circumstantial evidence of this. So
Rotterdam really is operating as normal. Obviously, UK is important, but it's not. It's a small part of the overall trade in and out of Rotterdam. But look,
it hasn't affected trade with the rest of the world. I think that's a very good point to make. In terms of errors, if you want to compare, that's very minor. Just a handful on the total. So yeah, stark contrast, I'm afraid, with GB consignments so far.
We're British. We like to think everything sort of revolves. Whatever happens here affects the whole of the world. But yeah, it is important to sort of put it in context in terms of overall trade and big sort of trading ports like Rotterdam. So we've got a question here from Adolf Merksteiner. It's another question from Austria. Questions: what do you recommend for live animal trade for the next few months entering the UK? There has been the UK government saying that they won't export live animals back from the UK to the EU. Anything? Let's put that to Nick. Any sort of thoughts on live animals coming in? I presume that won't. If you can't export them, you won't be able to import them either.
Yeah. So I mean, that consultation is still live at the moment. So the government hasn't officially confirmed what it plans to do around live animal exports, and more broadly transportation. So it's a sort of, the government is looking at that as a sort of animal welfare issue. And yes, I think there will be implications for both imports and exports, the results of that consultation. There's also an issue with the readiness of the UK, though, when it comes to any live animal imports, of having the necessary BCPs up and ready, and we do have some concerns at the moment about where we are going to be able to import live animals into the UK, should that be possible. And I think there will be some trade in live animals, high quality genetic stock, etc. There is at the moment there is a question mark over exactly where those BCPs will be, which will be able to take in imports, and it's a live question. We haven't had that resolved. There is an awareness of this as an issue, so we're talking to a few potential sites. You may have seen there's been some issues whether Portsmouth would be able to invest in the infrastructure to be a BCP and have the necessary funding for that. So it's a sort of live issue which hopefully will be resolved in time for the middle of the year, where the necessary controls will need to be in place for I think we've only got time for the last couple of questions, which so unfortunately you haven't been fast enough on with your typing to get any others in. But let's have James. Let's have Sarah Baker's, because we've had James already, and then I'll go to James last. Sarah, do you think Sarah's question is: do you think there is scope for a digital solution to replace the EHC paper-based system, which seems old-fashioned and inefficient in the 21st century? And what do you think the urgency to find a solution may alter after April the 1st?
who wants to go with that? Patrick, do you want to take that one up? They're using digital rather than, because it has been sort of paper-based, which does seem rather strange in this day and age.
It has indeed, and I think, Cedric, we'd all like to see a system move into a more electronic digital system over time if we can. But I think, to be realistic about it, in the timeframes that we're talking about, that's simply not going to be an option. I think it is something that you would hope that as we move down the track, you could look at that option. It would make it more seamless, a little bit more straightforward, and, as you say, instant rather than paperwork maybe not always being where it should be in terms of what's required on arrival and things like that. So you would hope that there would be an investment made in that over time. But it is something that, given the complexity of the trade, given the level of documentation required, it is something that would take quite some time, I would have thought, to put in place.
Great. Okay, sorry, we have James, your question: non-harmonized implementation of official controls is a big problem for exporters. I think I think we've answered that to a certain extent. If you don't think we have, then do jump to chat. So let's just have the one from Philip. Question for Nick: would UK farmers be supportive of the government pursuing a Swiss veterinary type alignment? Again, this is sort of alignment with the EU.
Yeah, short answer is yes, we would. I mean, I think if we could find ways of reducing the SBS frictions that exist at the moment, then absolutely. So yes, but as I said earlier, I think it may be a bit of a long haul to get to that. Certainly, it's not going to be resolved tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay, well, many thanks for that. Two of you will be staying on, Nick and Tim, you're going to be staying with us into the next session where we look more at policy. And then Patrick, I know you have to shoot off, so many thanks for your wise words and participation. That's been very useful, and to have that perspective as well from Ireland. And I suppose your message really is keep on talking. Keep that relationship going. It's so important to everyone, both sides of the La Manche and the Irish Sea, and so just keep talking.
Exactly.
So right, we're on to our next, the second session now, and that is, let me just share my screen again. You can see everything else that's going on my desktop there. Let's just go there, and we are on to part 2. UK farm policy alongside a changing CAP. And we're joined by Kieran Devlin, who's the Deputy Director Evidence and Analysis at the sort of Future Farming Department of DEFRA, which is the UK Food and Environment and Rural Affairs Ministry. And also we're joined by Caroline Drummond, who's the Chief Executive of LEAF, Linking Environment and Farming, a charity or NGO involved in developing more sustainable farming techniques through. I do have to declare an interest. I am actually the Vice Chairman of LEAF, so I will. I'll give Caroline a hard time. She can take it. But then again, we're being joined by Nick and Tim too, who can sort of comment. But we're just going to have a short presentation really from Kieran, just to put some context about what the UK policy is. But let's just have one slide. Let me just get, there we are. This is just one slide, just really on the different highlights. I'm not going to go through in great detail because we've because of time, and you will have these slides available. So if we look on the left-hand side of the screen in the red writing, this is actually more about the English system. With the UK, there's a Welsh and Scottish and Northern Ireland systems, which are slightly, or they will be slightly different in terms of support. But the main thing is that English farm and direct English farm support payments are going to be phased out from later on this year throughout to 2027. Those larger payments will be cut the fastest, and there's an introduction of a public funds and returns for a public goods approach. And really, I'm going to let Kieran explain some of the rest about that, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today. To put that in context with the changing CAP, the Farm to Fork and the Green Deal sort of system, there's more flexibilities. There's some overall goals, but there are more flexibility to how those for each country, how they implement those goals. But 30% of direct payments will be dependent on meeting environmental targets, and there will be a reduction in payments and a capping of payments at over €100,000, although there's some sort of leeway on terms of taking a salary out of that. And also sort of goals on a quarter of organic production to be organic by 2030, with a halving in pesticide uses as a target too. So a different sort of perspective. But let's go to Kieran. And Kieran, I've got your presentation here, and we'll whiz that through. So over to you, Kieran.
Great. Well, thanks, Cedric. I'm delighted to be here to talk to journalists from across Europe about the government's plans for domestic agricultural policy in England. I think just by way of context, I suppose the UK's departure from the EU has presented the government with an opportunity to have a look at its domestic agricultural policy from first principles. And I think the plans that it set out, which were published in the Agricultural Transition Plan towards the end of last year, really set out a kind of a rethink in sort of how the interaction between government and the domestic agriculture sector, with a huge amount of change proposed over that 7-year period that you've already set out. So there's quite a lot to get into, which I'll try to sort of give an overview of in 5 minutes, but it'll be sort of a whistle-stop tour across the top rather than getting too much into the detail, but we might be able to get into some of that in the questions. I think if you move on to the first slide, the overall context is the government has a vision for working with the sector to move towards more sustainable farming. So basically a thriving agricultural sector where the majority of farms can be productive, profitable, economically sustainable without subsidy, whilst making a significant and widespread contribution to environment, biodiversity, and climate change goals. So the main elements of the main planks of this kind of policy and this kind of transition scheme are obviously on the one hand the withdrawal of subsidy, but doing that kind of in an attempt to do that in a controlled way over a 7-year period, whilst introducing kind of transition and productivity support to help, acknowledging that this is a big change potentially to the business model for lots of farms. So there's transition and productivity support, whilst then gradually trying to encourage farmers to sort of jump on board with an increase in scale and ambition and scope of the agri-environment schemes in England. So very much building on the agri-environment schemes that we have and we continue to have under CAP, but really ramping those up and seeing those as real flagship contributors towards the government's broader environmental objectives set out in the 25-year environment plan, and in for example with their net zero by 2050 commitment. And the other plank of it is going to be a new system of regulation and enforcement. Obviously some of our regulation enforcement was closely tied to direct payments with the cross compliance requirements. So there's a chance to have a look at that anew as well. If you move on to the next slide, this just shows at a high level over the first 4 years of the transition, the shift in balance of public funds towards explicit targeting of environmental outcomes and the gradual reduction of subsidy. This is only for the first 4 years of the transition because the government has committed to maintaining the existing CAP envelope, if you like, until the end of the current Parliament. And thereafter, there's scope for that budget to be kind of revisited. So my job is obviously, I'm in charge of evidence analysis. It's one of my jobs to make sure we have the evidence analysis to show that the new approach and the spend on environmental outcomes is delivering value for money for the taxpayer. If you move on to the next slide, that just shows that in terms of the broad approach to the withdrawal of subsidy, it will be fastest for those larger farmers that receive the largest payments at the moment. So for those farmers, it's more front-loaded into the transition. So you can see that the farmers in receipt of the biggest subsidies would have had the majority of their subsidy withdrawn by 2024, whereas for the farmers with the smallest subsidy, they would have just be approaching half of their subsidy to be withdrawn by about 2024. So let me move on to talk about the elements of the transition support. In terms of productivity, we have a range of schemes. I won't actually get into these in too much detail. We've got schemes that we've got a farming investment fund, which is going to be productivity grants. Again, that's not massively dissimilar to some of the schemes that we would have had under the CAP. We also have some resilience funding, which is about supporting farmers with their business planning to adapt to the new reality that they'll be in. And some schemes specifically for farmers in protected landscapes to prepare for participation in ELM, the environmental land management schemes, as well as some initiatives on animal health. But what I will just move on to spend a few minutes on is the flagship agri-environment scheme, which is environmental land management.
Next one.
Yeah, so environmental land management is the new kind of umbrella name for actually a trio of schemes that we're developing at the moment and moving into pilots of. They target 6 public goods. I won't read them out, but it's about clean air, clean water. Climate change is a really important aspect of it. In terms of how these schemes are structured at a high level, if you move on to the next slide. So
next one, or
yeah, that one's fine. I'm aware I'm over time already, so I'll just touch on these quickly. The first scheme is the Sustainable Farming Incentive. This is a scheme that is targeting kind of mass participation. So we want this to be accessible for as many farmers as possible. And this is about simple actions that achieve environmental outcomes. It's kind of a foundation level scheme, which the other 2 schemes, which I'll talk about in a second, would build on. And it's about generating kind of valuable practices and outcomes that are most effective when delivered at scale. In other words, when sort of most farmers across the country are doing them. The second scheme, which we've called Local Nature Recovery, is about locally targeted environmental goals. So the kind of priorities for this scheme might vary across the country. It's about actions that kind of require some element of scale to really have impact. So it's about encouraging collaboration across land managers in a particular area. And the third aspect is landscape recovery. So this is all about wide-scale land use change. And this is a really ambitious element of the scheme. In terms of the timing for these, we're going to be bringing forward, hopefully quite soon, details of the pilot for the Sustainable Farming Incentive. We're also rolling out from 2022 a sort of early rollout of the full scheme. So the pilot kind of tests the full ambition of the scheme right now. The early rollout next year tests out a sort of simplified early edition, if you like, and we'll be bringing forward over the next couple of years pilots of the higher schemes with the view to the full scheme, the full trio of schemes being fully operational by 2024. So I'm aware that I've already overrun and I barely scratched the surface of some of the detail here, but that kind of roughly gives the
I think that gives us sort of really good sort of context of the sort of target. So really having that sort of scheme where you've got the on-farm change, then the sort of environment, your near environment, if you like, and then to a larger extent, perhaps more cooperation between farmers to have a more of a sort of landscape impact. So yeah, no, that's very useful. Let's go to Caroline. Caroline, if you could just give us a few sort of thoughts about how you see change in policy both in the UK but also in the EU, and are the similarities and are the differences?
Well, that's a very big question, and obviously I'm going to whistle through that in 5 minutes, and thank you. And what Cedric also didn't say was he was one of my students when 30 years ago I was a lecturer in agronomy at an agricultural college and a forklift truck driver instructor. So I've known Cedric a long time. Of course, I mean, I think, you know, the challenge of what is alignment really between the UK changes and the EU changes is something that I think as an organisation and actually as an opportunity right across Europe is going to be very key. For the UK, as Kieran has explained, you know, this is about the public goods delivery. For the EU, again, you know, that reduction in environmental and climate footprints, strengthening resilience, and the opportunity to lead this sort of global transition and sustainability from the farm to fork perspective. I think for us, that alignment is going to be something that's very, very key. The very fact that we're all facing in the right direction. Sustainability is not a competition. We need now to find new ways to deliver what are going to ultimately be probably the same outcomes. And I think perhaps the great opportunity ahead now is that actually, because there is not going to be just one solution is going to drive that change, we have a suite of opportunities here on the table to really sort of look at how do we adapt, develop and change to ultimately drive actually what will not only be more circular approaches to agriculture. Tim, I didn't hear you say about circular agriculture when you were talking, but that key importance of the circularity, less leaky systems that are key in terms of driving those nature-based solutions, building resilience into our farming businesses against obviously a climate change and enhancing our valuable natural habitats and environments. And of course, alongside that, maintaining productivity. In addition to that, we are all needing to empower consumers, you know, feeding into their desires and responsibilities of a more sustainable agriculture, more sustainable choices. One thing COVID-19 has definitely done right across the world is to build people's connections with nature, but also actually their sense of sustainability. And we're seeing, you know, Generation Z or Z, Alpha generations, all really enthused about more sustainable food choices. And therefore, that is what links so straight into our farmers who are there to deliver that. And I think, you know, this is going to be the opportunity to empower farmers in such a way that they are actually recognized for their contribution in terms of what they deliver from a soil perspective, what they deliver in terms of acting as a carbon sink, what they deliver in healthy, sustainable food choices, alongside clean water and its associated sustainable use, clean air, and enhanced and improved nature and habitats. I think, you know, this is very much about the best of traditional and the best of modern technology aligned to what are going to be ultimately increasingly harmonized metrics and measurements that we really need. You know, if you look at our big sort of target areas, that is the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and things like COP15 with the aligned biodiversity drive as well. And of course, we have these shared goals: net carbon zero, enhanced biodiversity, improved health, nature-based solutions. And in building this and improving this understanding and stronger dialogue between citizens and farmers, we have increasingly urban societies. And we need that dialogue to actually demonstrate, look, this is what we're doing through sustainable choices from a farming perspective, but actually likewise, you know, supporting consumers in making their day-to-day choices. That's something that's very important. And of course, both the EU and the UK are well placed to actually have advanced farming systems already. We've got can-do farmers, and we're not actually going to be impacted as much by the challenges of climate change as many others are across the world. So that in itself drives our sense of responsibility right across Europe and, you know, and obviously the UK as well, in terms of making sure that we do the right thing and present leadership in this area. And I think, you know, we're very involved in Horizon 2020 research projects where we partner as an organisation with very many other EU countries. And all of this is very important to actually look at how we then support and enhance enabling legislation, I know there are 4 ways to drive change, and one is make sure the system works in the first place. And for us at LEAF, that has been the development and the framework of integrated farm management. It's logical, it's progressive, it's adaptive. The second is the show and tell. Demonstration farms, advice and things like that are very key. We have a network in the UK of LEAF demonstration farms and innovation centres, and we partner with many others across Europe. And this exchange of information is exciting and drives change. The third way is the market pull. We run LEAF Mark, which builds on Global Gap across the EU, and in the UK on Red Tractor. It's a global standard. 43% of UK fruit and veg is LEAF Mark certified. And I think, you know, that market provides an opportunity for a farmer to be proud of what they're doing and for a consumer to buy into that space as well. And then finally, kind of, you know, it's the if all else fails, then legislate. You know, legislation is ultimately about prevention of harm. And I think what the changes that are going on now to both the reform of the CAP and at an EU level and in the UK are actually really enabling farmers to do the right thing. And that transition is going to be something that's very, very key. So the opportunities are huge. And I think our shared ambitions to deliver to sort of different ways will, of course, create the diversity that's needed to come with meaningful changes that will ultimately transform our food and farming, and so that it becomes second nature to us all. Thank you, Cedric.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you. I was taking notes as I was 30 years ago. Still can't read my own handwriting. Many thanks for that. So please get your questions in to Adrian Bell, who's also been organising this this seminar, is vetting your questions and sending them through to me. So we have one from Michael Bunny. Where might concepts such as regenerative agriculture as a more specific approach fit in? So this idea of sort of regenerative agriculture. Kieran, is that something that you're looking at, and the way perhaps of changing the way that farmers farm? Is that something that you're looking at as well? You're on mute.
Very much so. Classic COVID lockdown mistake. I think, I mean, as we put together the environmental land management schemes, part of what we're doing is trying to take the broadest possible kind of outlook as to, you know, what are all the actions that we could you know, fund farmers to participate to deliver on their land. So we really do want to take a very, very broad view of things. And in some ways, some of the schemes that we bring forward in the early part of the transition will be simple and straightforward, like I said. So they might not be the most ambitious in terms of the, you know, at the cutting edge of some practice. But over time, we do want to get there and try to bring farmers on that journey. So things like regenerative practice, that is very much part of our thinking.
Caroline, just you on that regen agriculture, regen ag, should we call it?
Yeah, well, actually, for 30 years, you know, LEAF has been developing and promoting regen agriculture as an integral part of integrated farm management. I think the great thing about things like regen ag or agroecological approaches is that, you know, we're on a continuous improvement. And the baseline will continue to change. There will be new ways of doing things. There'll be new technology that farmers can introduce. And I think that's been something that's been actually pretty critical, is making sure the framework is right so that farmers can adapt and develop and drive change. And so, yes, I mean, we have many regenerative practices already adopted within integrated farm management. And, you know, our farmers are continually refining, experimenting, and looking at new ways to really sort of dig deeper in how we ultimately sink more carbon into our soils.
Tim, from you about regen ag, is that you've got this sort of circular approach to food policy and other policies. Regen ag, is that very much part of that?
Well, the term doesn't come by as much as here in the UK. So, as you said, our approach, our vision is for circular agriculture, to apply circular approaches, but of course that in many cases leads more or less to the same. To take soil health, which is key to that approach. Healthy soil is the basis. Responsible soil management that means low inputs, low tillage, precision farming, and that's all for the soil to be able to recover and regenerate. So, you know, phasing out artificial fertilizer, etc. I think it's all moving in the same direction. So, yeah, give it a label you want, but in our case, we chose circular agriculture that connects very much to the circular economy as a whole, trying to phase out food waste as well, for example. And that's the way we want to go. And I think that fits in with both the CAP reform and the new domestic agriculture policy in the UK as well.
So we've all got sort of different forms of wheels. I know Leaf has got its own wheel, circular agriculture, rotations, regen, you know, it's all different types of wheels, hopefully going in the right direction. A question for Caroline from Jacqueline Benga. If UK and EU have so much in common, that shared ambitions, how can you make sure that the EU and UK cooperate and work together now that the UK has chosen for its own path, looking outside Europe as well?
So, I mean, I think it's building on the touch points. Climate change has got no barriers. Our farmers have no barriers in terms of connections through social media in particular. And I think, you know, the work that we do, as I gave an example with the Horizon 2020 research projects, and we're involved in some 7 of those, is that actually, you know, farmers across the world are united in that they are constantly looking at, you know, they work with nature, they work in nature, and they are looking to make sure that they do a good job of not only their responsibility of producing healthy food, but actually as stewards of the countryside. And I think we need to increasingly build on that opportunity. I mean, all your roles as journalists in terms of sharing global stories, again, is something that's very, very important. And wherever Tim goes, oh, that's a shame in 5 years' time, you know, it's making sure those connections are still kept as well, because we certainly, you know, both as an organization, but actually, you know, I think I speak for all our farmers as well, really value their relationship that they have with farmers right across Europe. And of course, you know, Leaf Mark is a global standard, so we will continue to work across our European partners, and indeed many of our UK farmers that we work with as an organisation are also growing in Spain and France and things like that.
Thank you, Caroline. We've got a question here from Thomas Hasselberger. What do you think will be the biggest effects of phasing out direct payments? Is there already some sort of impact assessment has been done? That's from Thomas in Austria. Nick, do you want to pick that up, and then Kieran as well?
Yeah, sure. I'm sure Kieran will have quite a lot to say, because DEFRA have certainly done some analysis on the impact of phasing out direct payments, as have we. It won't surprise you. I mean, I think that there's 2 ways you can look at it. I mean, we can look at just what happens if you phase out direct payments, and as we know now, they're going to be essentially halved for everyone, and for some people, the decreases will be bigger over the next 3-4 years. So that will mean quite a lot off the bottom line for farmers. And I'm trying to remember some of this off the top of my head, but I think it's around about almost 50%. It's 46% or something of farmers as an average. And obviously there's huge differences in the productivity and profitability of farms, but as an average, would be unprofitable without any direct payments whatsoever. So they do form a very important part of farmers' incomes in the UK, particularly in the more extensive sectors, so red meat, livestock, and arable, where they are very important parts of income. So looking at that alone, it is obviously quite a concerning outlook. But of course, we have heard that there is something else coming in, and I think the big question mark is, to the degree to which farmers across the board will be able to tap into these new schemes in a way that can offset some of the loss in direct payments. Hopefully they'll be able to, but of course there are a couple of issues there. The public purse, the degree to which the government will in future be able to properly finance these schemes. We've got a guarantee up until the end of the current parliament, which will probably be 2024 for the current budget cash total, but it doesn't go past that. So there's a question mark there. I think the other question mark we have is over the fact that certainly when this whole reform program came into being a couple of years ago, there was a suggestion that a lot of this could be made up or offset by increased productivity in farming across the UK. And we would hope that we can do a bit better on productivity, because it hasn't been brilliant in the UK over recent years and decades. But I think there is a concern that there's a lot of good farmers out there, particularly in sectors like, for example, arable livestock, where these losses might be most keenly felt, for who there's not actually a massive amount of further financial gains that can be made through productivity improvements. So I'm sure while everybody can take a little bit off their costs here and there, improve their revenue a little bit here and there, it seems to us it's probably not going to be to the sorts of levels that might make significant offsets, as I say, of the losses from direct payments. So there's a couple of question marks there, but I'm sure Kieran will have some more insight on that from a definite.
Yes, Kieran, because I suppose it's sort of concern if farmers aren't viable, and then they can't carry out a lot of the environmental objectives, as well as producing food as well. So doing that sort of impacts assessment and taking away or phasing out of payments.
Yeah, well, I mean, that viability is important, because we need farmers on the land to be able to deliver the environmental services that we're talking about here. So the sustainability that I mentioned is twofold. It's environmental sustainability, but it's also farmers producing food produce in a sort of sustainable business model. I mean, in terms of the modelling of the impact of removing direct payments, we have published some analysis of this a while back now, and there's no getting away from the fact that subsidy being a kind of obviously there's some cross compliance requirements, but it's sort of largely a chunk of money that goes directly into the profit of farms. So it is a large contribution towards profits. It does vary quite a bit across farm types, and so there will be different challenges in different areas. We do see the biggest impact for livestock farms, particularly in the uplands, where they're sort of under the biggest kind of challenge in terms of profitability on just the pure agriculture side of their business. But against that, those livestock farms in the uplands at the moment are some of the biggest participants in the agri-environment schemes, and maybe are sort of best placed to sort of participate at greater scale as the focus shifts in that direction. In terms of how profits might adjust, it's a $1 million question. They're hopefully, I mean, as you know, as we just talked about, the program, the Future Farming program is hoping to work with farms and invest and help to support farms to grow their productivity. I don't think we should expect heroics, as Nick says. Probably might be some room to improve there, and there will be some things that farms can do, and the sort of the pressure that comes from losing the subsidy might result in some kind of investments and sort of changes being found. But I don't think we should expect absolute heroics from that. There may also be some adjustment in terms of rents, to the extent that subsidy is capitalized into rental, the rents the farmers are paying. There's also no getting away from the fact that there may be some exits, and some farmers may look at the kind of the new world and think actually it's time to pack up the operation. And there will be an option for farmers to take their future stream of direct payments as a lump sum, in order for those for whom that is the best decision, to help to sort of allow them to do that.
Great, thanks, Kieran. James McCulloch is asking, should future UK and EU ag policy address food security? Tim, do you want to have that one first?
Yeah, sure. Very brief. I should probably start by pointing out that actually the formal first and foremost goal of the CAP is, of course, to provide food security in Europe. The question is, how do you do that? I think in the past, the approach with coupled payments worked a bit too well in the end. So we moved away from that. I think for the Netherlands, it's important that to be able to have food security, but also as a condition to be able to move towards circular approaches, etc., is that farmers get a fair price and a good income for their efforts. So that's central to our vision. Of course, it's not always the CAP itself that delivers on that. It's also other regulations. We really need to look at the position of the farmer in the supply chain, and how that compares to the position of retailers and others in that chain. So that's what we're looking at. We're doing a lot of research, and we're speaking to supermarkets. But that's something that we need to move on.
Thanks. And Kieran, from your point of view, the food security that has been boosted a bit in the agricultural policy as it's turned out. I know there was criticism in its sort of first draft that it wasn't as strong as it perhaps should have been.
Yeah, I mean, well, going back to the wording of the question, I think, you know, food security is always going to be an issue that ministers, any government is going to worry about and have as something that they think about. And there is, I think, with everything that we developed through the new domestic agricultural policy, we do have a duty to consider the impact on food production that was set out in the recent Agriculture Act. So that's always going to be there, and I think, you know, our experience over the last year has just sort of, if anything, accentuated that.
Can I add to that?
And I know both Nick and you, Caroline. Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. I mean, I think this is such a key question, actually, because I think we don't unpick what food security actually represents enough. You know, and I agree with both what Tim and Kieran have said. But actually, if you start unpicking food security, it is partly about it's about sort of a viable level of self-sufficiency. It's about food safety. It's about the value chains that Tim's just talked about. It's about authenticity. But in addition to that, behind that, it is about the capability of farmers to be able to farm against a changing background. And that has to be framed within supportive legislation, supportive financial models, the skills and the knowledge, having the right people there, the right amount of staff that are well trained, having somebody who's going to be able to fix the tires or your tractor or the vacuum pump when it's broken. It's having access to seeds, markets, as well as obviously inputs and things like that. So I think, you know, we often kind of throw food security away as a simple sort of question, when actually we should be really putting it center stage to recognize that actually behind it is our capability to farm as well, in terms of really driving a good, robust food security platform.
Thank you. We've got a question from Ken. He's sort of trying to combining this session with the last, really. Any study of climate change targets suggest expanding things like UK beef production and exports has a limited future. Sorry, it's just gone zipped. It's disappeared in front of my eyes. Yeah, so there's a limited future for beef production, climate change studies might suggest. Are these medium to longer term issues being taken into account by policy planners? So the whole sort of climate change and what we should be producing. Who wants, Nick, do you want to jump in that one first?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's a whole session to be had on the future of livestock farming and it's how it plays into the climate change debate. We've pointed out on many occasions recently, every time this kind of flares up, that you know, the GHG impact of livestock farming in the UK is significantly lower than the global levels. It's about 2.5 times less. So there are different types of red meat production, and I think it's arguable that actually if more red meat was produced in extensive grassroots sort of systems that the UK can excel in, that would actually have a better outcome. And then we can get into debates about actually the metrics and how the GHG equivalent is measured, methane versus carbon, etc. It gets quite complicated. So I don't think it is as straightforward as simply saying if we're going to meet our climate change ambitions, then that is going to mean getting rid of the UK beef herd, or that's a simplification of what the question is. But I think it is unfortunately sometimes framed as that. So actually what we really need to do, and Caroline touched on it a bit there, is talk about, well, actually, how can we build a farm production system, whether in the UK or in the EU, particularly Northern Europe, which I think are particularly suitable to these sorts of systems, which are more sustainable, which continue to provide food and a range of different foods and good protein, as in red meat as well, but in a more sustainable fashion, and which are more aligned with our climate change ambitions. So I think this is it's a complicated issue that is not, can't be really just summed up as in terms of we're going to have to just produce less red meat, or significantly less red meat.
Great. We got it. Sarah Baker's got a question or a point really about saying, isn't food security about willingness and ability to pay, and so an economic and a political issue? And really sort of reiterating those sort of points that you made, that it is, Caroline, that it's a wider issue rather than just making sure farmers are producing food. It's how they do it and where they do it as well. I wanted to go back to really just as we finish off, and really this is questions, we had questions from Stefan Nimmervoll, and we also had a question from Catherine Pace, and I'm going to sort of combine the two. The first one from Stefan was, will British farmers finally be better off with or without the EU? Perhaps Nick, you'd like to answer that one, and then also we had a question from Catherine, and Catherine's question really for all of you was, what's the biggest challenge as the UK has now left the EU? If we say perhaps in 2 years' time, when things might have sort of settled down, what will be the biggest challenge? Will it be on sort of trade, or will it be something else? Crystal ball gazing. Yeah, Nick, you go first. Just on the, is it going to be good or bad?
Well, I think the concern we have at the moment is the amount of uncertainty across a whole load of policy areas. So, I mean, Kieran has done a great job setting out the kind of broad direction of travel on agricultural policy and farm support, but clearly there's quite a lot of detail still to be filled in there. In terms of our trade relationships with the EU, we're negotiating a whole load of FTAs. We don't know what they're going to involve, what sort of market access. So there's massive uncertainty. But what I would say is I don't think it's about, are we going to be better with or without the EU? We've left the EU. Brexit has happened. That's done. We still have a trading relationship, a very important trading relationship with the EU. What I am concerned about is that the politics are sort of elbowing out the economics at the moment, where the UK government is nervous or kind of concerned about how it looks to try and forge a close relationship with the EU as a non-member, and instead is talking very positively about the prospects of trade deals with countries the other side of the world, who are primarily agricultural exporters, not importers. And actually, those should be nice to haves on top of a smooth, clean, and close trading relationship with the EU. That is what a sensible approach to all this would be. Are we going to get that? I don't know. And I think that is probably answering both the questions that are in there. Certainly, there's a lot of unknowns at the moment to be resolved in the next few years.
So yeah, let's just whiz through for biggest challenge. Caroline, let's your biggest let's say in 2 years' time, what's the biggest challenge going to be?
I mean, I think we're still, we're battling against, aside from the trade and all those, huge climate change impacts as well. And, those are the huge challenge. It's trying to build scale and speed. And actually something that was touched on in the previous session, which was around a trust model. So actually, we really need to develop a very strong trust model between sort of private-public partnerships and NGOs in terms of the earned recognition, such as with things like LEAFmark and other assurance schemes. And of course, really try and build that confidence amongst farmers that, this is the right way forward, because there's an awful lot of unanswered questions at the moment. And so trying to really strengthen that capability of this is the right line, this is where we're going, and this is how to do it, and we trust you to deliver it.
And Kieran, how about you from the biggest sort of challenge?
I'm going to duck the question slightly, and I think for me it's more the simultaneity of several challenges, which maybe added together, presents a real, a really stiff challenge for the sector. So on the one hand, we've got the transition. We've got to sort of adjust to the withdrawal of subsidy across the sector. But on the other hand, we have the environmental challenges, and specifically the asks around delivering net zero and what agriculture can do to play its part there. Those are two things that are effectively going to have to happen at the same time, and they're both sort of very large asks. And potentially there's a third element there if the trading arrangements do shift and we do sign new trade deals. And I'm not commenting on that in a sort of positive or negative way, but any new trading arrangement will have will result in new things to adjust to. So I think there could be sort of a wave of things that sort of happen at the same time. We're very close to each other, which added together probably present quite a stiff challenge.
And for you, Tim?
I'm going to stick close to my work as a diplomat. I think that a challenge, but it's something that I look quite positive on, is trying to set aside the politics sometimes, the sometimes negative politics that came out of the Brexit negotiations, and consider ourselves real North Sea neighbors, like you see behind me. I always stress we are very like-minded as the Netherlands and the UK in agricultural policy, trying to deliver public goods. We're designing our eco schemes at the same time as you are designing your environmental land management scheme. But also in a whole other range of topics like gene editing, animal welfare. Let's try to focus on improving standards together, designing workable, positive legislation together. Something that works for all of us. That's what we need to do. That's our challenge.
I think it's a perfect way to end. Thank you for that, Tim. I think there's that sort of cooperation that we are still very much, as your map or your photo behind sort of shows, we're still very, very much sort of strong neighbours. So many thanks to our panel and to everyone else involved in the putting this on together. And also, sorry, I'm just going to whiz through to my last slide here. Yeah, the slides will be available. So many thanks to the panel, to Padraig, and also many thanks to those behind the scenes, in particular to Adrian Bell, who's been organising it and fielding the questions. And I'd just like to hand over now to Hans Siems, who's the chairman of the ENAJ, the European Network of Agricultural Journalists, and thanks to him too and his team on the committee there for helping to organise as well. But over to Hans, and many thanks, and wish you all well and a safe 2021. And I suppose as for challenges, we never quite know what's coming around the corner, and that's certainly been the case this year. So many thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Hans.
Okay, thank you, Cedric. I think Ina can be very satisfied with this webinar.
And sorry, we can't see you. I think it would be good if we could see you.
How can we do it?
Oh, don't worry.
I wait for Adrian.
Mm-hmm. Apologies. No, do carry on, Hans.
Yes, without a video. I still want to thank you, Cedric. As I said, we can be very satisfied with this webinar. It gave a good and detailed insight in the consequences of Brexit for farmers and the food industry in the UK and in the EU. To split up the webinar in two parts was a very good idea. About the trade exports, we got a very clear insight in the 8 weeks experiences with the trade, and to say it friendly, there is still a lot to improve with checks, certificates, inspections, costs, and especially for the fresh products. I wasn't aware that 60 or 70% of the live animals and meats are incorrect in rotten and laying there. About the policy, the impact for the income of the British farmers will be huge, with a lot of uncertainty, because we have heard that Britain is still working on the important details of the new policy without the direct payments. What I think was very interesting was the approach of the public funds in return for public goods. It says that farmers do more than just food production. And what I've heard is that there are similar aspects and goals in the EU and in the UK policy. But the interesting part is that the UK has somewhat more ambitious things in the way they're planning the payments for climate change, circular farming, and so on. That was just a very brief wrap-up of what we have heard. I want to thank the British Guild for hosting this ENI webinar, and I want to thank the panelists for their excellent contribution to the webinar. Patrick Brennan from Bordbia, who has left us yet, Carolyn Drummond, Nick von Westenholz, Tim Hedema, and Kieran Devlin from DEFRA. Normally there would be a big applause, but be sure that we all would have given that well-deserved applause under normal circumstances. And last but not least, I want to thank Adrian Bell for his work organizing and during the webinar, the background, and Cedric Porter, who helped organize this webinar and who was a very great moderator. It's always a benefit if the moderator is well informed about the theme. Cedric, what you did was fantastic. And to you, participants, thank you very much for joining us. Stay safe and healthy, and hopefully we see you again at our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.